Hello, everyone. My name is Reilly Mooney, and I'm the project coordinator for the Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative. WWDI is a nonprofit community-based initiative that promotes the conservation of the African wild dog population living in the Waterberg, South Africa. It was founded in August 2020 from an internal desire within the Waterberg community to build upon and aid the previous conservation efforts, but from a community perspective. After all, the Waterberg wild dogs live in the Waterberg, so the Waterberg community should play a role in their conservation. WWDI is managed by myself and is overseen by a steering committee representing various ideals and interests in Waterberg wild dog conservation. We're a small team, and we work alongside the community to raise awareness, provide education, gain accurate information, boost the dog's ecotourism potential, and work to understand the conflict taking place. WWDI serves as a free community resource, providing helpful information about the dogs and conflict mitigation measures, and acting as a communication channel between the Waterberg community and those making management decisions. The Waterberg is in the Limpopo province of South Africa and represents about 1.4 million hectares of mountainous bushveld terrain, or about 2/3 the size of the Kruger National Park. It has a rich diversity of plant and animal species, including a relatively intact large predator guild, with the exception of free-roaming lions. Because of its pristine natural landscape, part of the Waterberg has been designated as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. The Waterberg is currently home to about 23 wild dogs contained in 4 different packs. We have been able to fit 2 of the packs with GPS tracking collars, the breeding pack in the northern section of the Waterberg and a male dispersal pack in the southern section. Overall, the Waterberg is a very conservation-focused area, and main land uses include private and public nature reserves, agriculture, game ranching, hunting, livestock farming, and ecotourism. The private farms can range in size from 10 hectares to over 50,000 hectares, all with varying degrees of fencing types, accessibility, land uses, and tolerances for free-roaming predators. Every prey species for the wild dogs has a financial value, not only the livestock, this includes game as well, and that value can vary depending on the farm's land use, stock density, and perceptions towards wild dogs. In addition to this, the rise of the game ranching industry and the intensive selective breeding of game in the Waterberg has led to a drastic increase in the value of some of the natural prey for the wild dogs. At the end of the day, even if the landowners don't rely on an income directly from the farm, many of the Waterberg farms are businesses in some shape or form. Something that is expensive to keep around, like the wild dogs, is just not tolerated, especially for long periods of time. But we've also found that landowners just don't know enough about the dogs to make informed management decisions, which is where we're trying to step in to help. We need to understand more about the dogs and the difference between the perceived and the actual conflict in the area in order to effectively help. We also need to raise tolerance levels by increasing our knowledge, changing perceptions, and encouraging coexistence. WWDI strives to promote conflict mitigation tools and deterrents that are sustainable and promote coexistence between farmers and the wild dogs. We're also an extremely practical and on-the-grounds initiative, so everything needs to be relatively cheap and easy to implement. It's very easy to go out and tell the farmers that they need to upgrade their fences, but this is the type of terrain that we're working in, and that is very expensive for the farmers and unrealistic for most. Never mind the implications of now fragmenting the habitat even further with impenetrable fencing. So we're trying to promote the ideas of protecting the high-value game and livestock by deterring dogs from certain areas like breeding camps and livestock crawls, while allowing them to continue to range on the rest of the property. We'll also make use of the fact that the dogs are wide-ranging and really, apart from the denning season, are only making use of each property a few times a year. By placing GPS collars on the breeding pack, we've been able to implement an early warning system on WhatsApp for the farmers as the pack moves through private properties. The group is made up of community members within the pack's range, and we use it to share movement updates, information about the pack, and use it to host any sort of community-wide discussions about the dogs. Now we can show the community the general movements of the dogs, which shows them the incredible home range size they have relative to other predators, and gives them an early warning when the dogs enter their area and allow them to take steps to proactively mitigate potential conflict against those high-value animals. It also gives the community a better chance of seeing the dogs while they're on their property. We don't post specific farm names or GPS locations on the group because we do need to be mindful of the fact that that location information can be used to harm the dogs. Rather, we post a generic update of a picture of the dog's location amongst the terrain and a brief description. Every farmer in this area knows exactly what their property lines are and what the terrain looks like on their farm, so they know if the dogs are getting close to them. In addition to this posting general movement updates on the group, I also privately contact the farms in the dog's immediate area to let them know the dogs are around, answer any questions they might have, and provide advice and assistance regarding conflict mitigation measures if needed. WWDI being a community-based initiative means that we're all members of the same community. So we have many relationships with the community members outside of just this wild dog work. These personal relationships are extremely important in changing perceptions about the dogs because rather than the information coming from an outsider conservationist, it's coming from the farmer's neighbor and friend. In the last year and a half, the pack has utilized over 50,000 hectares and over 45 different private properties. These collars have helped us end the perceived war on wild dogs with some of the farmers in this area because they can now see that the dogs are only very rarely on their properties, whereas previously they believed that they were there all the time and were responsible for all of their stock losses. On the other side, these collars have also allowed us to see that a few properties within the pack's range are being utilized more than others. So we can now focus our efforts on helping those properties that are really experiencing above average utilization by the pack. In 2021, we had 2 instances of stationary and relatively stationary periods for the dogs where we needed to mitigate conflict. One was the denning season, which is to be expected, and the other is actually just the period before the dog's denning season from about January to April 2021. The dogs shrunk their home range size down to only about 8,000 hectares, mainly utilizing 3 properties for a period of 3.5 months. The cause of this reduced movements is largely unknown, but we speculate that it was due to a combination of a number of factors. This stationary behavior was really causing a lot of conflict with the farmers because despite our best intentions, we couldn't chase the dogs off of the properties with our usual strategies. We put our heads together and we came up with a pretty innovative solution to try to use lion scat as a deterrent, but by placing it in strategic spots. There are typically no free roaming lions within this pack's range, and none of the properties where they range have lions, so they're not used to seeing them or smelling them. Lion scat has also been used as a pretty effective bioboundary before with wild dogs, but trying to create an effective bioboundary around this area of about 8,000 hectares was just extremely unrealistic. Plus, the dogs were already inside of this problem area, so we didn't want to risk trapping them in. With the help of the community, we placed lion scat in the area 4 times, each targeting areas frequently used by the pack and closest to the dog's immediate location on that specific day. We don't have the tracking data to show the dog's exact reaction to the scat because our collars only sync a few times a day, so we don't know what they're doing in between. But we did notice that the scat seems to have gotten the dogs moving around more than they were before we placed it. They moved about 5 to 10 kilometers in the days following each of the scat placements, whereas they were barely moving 1 to 2 kilometers in the day beforehand. We haven't used lion scat as a deterrent since because we don't want to habituate the pack to it. It's really a last-ditch effort to mitigate conflicts before getting to a point where we receive threats of lethal control or pack removal. But it seems to have worked. It was relatively cheap and easy to implement, and it made use of a natural rather than an artificial deterrent for the dogs. The second stationary period where we mitigated conflict was during the dog's denning season. The pack denned for a second year in a row in 2021, and fortunately denned on a property that welcomed them with open arms. The farm they chose formed part of a 5,000 hectare private conservancy, which is large for this area, but still far too small to host the pack during the denning season and not feel an impact on their stock species. Also, the dogs don't just hunt on the property where they den, they make use of the closest neighboring properties as well. During this period, we ran a wild dog-based ecotourism model based on a model that EWT ran in 2018, also in the Waterberg. This model generated funds from visitors paying to see the wild dogs and distributed the funds back to the properties impacted by having the pack den in the area. This period also provided us with an opportunity to increase awareness and appreciation for the dogs and to learn new information about them. Over 6.5 weeks, 144 guests donated to view the pack, raising about 54,250 Rand. In addition to this, we supplemented the pack's diet with fresh carcasses and potentially reduced their predation on the supporting farms by 50%. Between these carcass donations and the financial contribution from the ecotourism guests, approximately 137,400 Rand was raised to support the landowners during this time. We distributed the funds to the impacted farms by using GPS data to determine where all of the dogs' potential hunts were during the denning season. The funds were then divided based on the proportion of potential hunts on each property. The ecotourism operation wasn't a walk in the park. The dogs' responses to the call-ups were unpredictable, even after months of habituation, with no noticeable change in our methodology. We also lost many of our bookings due to South Africa's third wave of COVID regulations and restrictions and civil unrest throughout the country. Overall, it was definitely not the easiest ecotourism project to run, given all of the circumstances out of our control, but it was still a very successful project, and we'll be looking to replicate it again this year if the pack does den. Just a few takeaways. We need to be careful not to create more conflict than what we're solving, particularly with the early warning mechanism. I view tolerances towards the wild dogs as a sliding scale, not as black and white, love or hate dogs. We have a few people that really love the dogs, a few people that really hate the dogs, and the vast majority is somewhere in between, and that's great. Not everybody thinks about wild dogs as much as we do. But by sending frequent updates, we put ourselves into a situation where we were sending constant reminders to farmers that the dogs were on their property and in the area, which made some typically indifferent farmers quite intolerant because it made it seem like the dogs were continuously hunting on their property all day, every day, for days at a time, which just wasn't the case. We need to provide landowners with the information and the tools to make management decisions, but not add to the problem by making the problem seem bigger than it actually is. It's also a balancing act between the number of wild dogs in the area and community tolerances. We want the Waterberg wild dogs to remain a free-roaming population in the area, but we know that the population can't get too big without risking the community tolerances. Information and communication is key. Information is needed to make informed management decisions, identify areas of potentially high conflict, and work towards solutions. This information needs to be communicated with the community, and the community needs to have the ability to contact someone with questions and concerns and trust that their voice is being heard. The last thing we want is for the community to stop communicating with us, because that means that they're unwilling to work with us towards a solution. I always tell the community that we might not all agree on our level of love towards the Waterberg wild dogs, and that is okay. I don't need them to be a passionate advocate for the dogs, but that doesn't mean that we can't or we shouldn't work together. We also mustn't underestimate the value of education and awareness work in changing perceptions. I've noticed a drastic difference in the community's attitudes towards the pack after the denning season, where many of the community members had the chance to view the pack for the first time and were able to get pictures, videos, stories, and learn new information about the dogs. This has personified them and changed them from these previously unknown, misunderstood animals into the beautiful, complex, and playful dogs that they actually are. Overall, the main point that I want to make is that in this situation, a community-based initiative has the potential to really aid conservation efforts. The success comes from inspiring the community to play a part in the conservation of the dogs by encouraging citizen scientists, keeping the community involved, changing perceptions, forming these tight-knit relationships, being a friend, and just really employing a help thy neighbor mindset. Conserving these dogs and working towards solutions for the conflict being experienced is no small task, but we stand a shot at keeping the Waterberg a safe place for the dogs if we can all work together. Thank you very much. If anyone would like to contact me for more information on any of the information I've presented, for questions or to collaborate, my contact details are here.